Cold-hearted millionaire marries a janitor, her secret life stuns everyone. Victor Chambers strode into the towering glass skyscraper that bore his name, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. His employees scurried to get out of his way, avoiding his icy glare. Victor had built his empire through ruthlessness, and he had little patience for mediocrity. To him, people were tools, either useful or disposable. "Mr. Chambers, the board meeting is in 5 minutes," his assistant, Grace, informed him as she struggled to keep up with his brisk pace. "I know, Grace. I don't need reminders, I need results," Victor snapped, not bothering to look at her. Grace flinched but said nothing. Victor's temper was infamous, and most of his staff knew better than to cross him. In the break room, Elena Rivera mopped the floor, humming softly to herself. She wore a plain uniform and comfortable shoes, her dark hair tied back in a practical bun. She was invisible to most of the people who worked in the building, but that didn't bother her. Elena liked her quiet life. It was simpler this way. "Elena, you've missed a spot," a snide voice said. Elena turned to see Amanda, one of the senior executives, smirking at her. Amanda often made jabs at Elena, clearly enjoying her position of power. "Yes, ma'am," Elena said calmly, moving her mop to the indicated area. She didn't react to Amanda's taunts. Years of dealing with people like her had taught Elena to pick her battles. Later that evening, Victor attended a lavish charity gala hosted by his company. The event was a spectacle of wealth, with chandeliers casting a golden glow over the room and waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne. Victor, dressed in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, stood near the bar, scanning the room with a bored expression. His mother, Catherine Chambers, approached him, her diamond necklace sparkling under the lights. "Victor, darling, have you met the Duval family? Their daughter, Lila, is quite charming and single." Victor sighed. "Mother, I'm not interested in being paraded around like some prize." Catherine pursed her lips. "You're 35, Victor. It's time you settled down with someone suitable." "Suitable?" Victor repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean someone rich and pedigreed, like the Duvals?" Catherine smiled tightly. "Exactly." Victor rolled his eyes and turned away, leaving his mother fuming. He hated these events, with their shallow conversations and endless expectations. As he made his way to the exit, he passed Elena, who had been hired to clean up after the gala. She was kneeling near the corner of the room, picking up a broken glass. Her presence was so unassuming that Victor almost didn't notice her. But something made him stop. She seemed different. While everyone else at the gala wore masks of pretension, Elena exuded a quiet dignity. "Who are you?" Victor asked abruptly, his tone sharp. Elena looked up, startled. "Excuse me? You work here, don't you?" Victor continued, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "Yes," Elena said cautiously. "I'm part of the cleaning staff." Victor studied her for a moment, then smirked. "Of course. Carry on." Elena frowned as he walked away. She didn't like the way he had spoken to her, but she shrugged it off. She had more important things to worry about than the whims of a billionaire. The next morning, Victor arrived at the office to find the building buzzing with gossip. Apparently, someone had accidentally spilled coffee on his mother during the gala, and Catherine had thrown a fit. Victor chuckled to himself as he stepped into the elevator. His mother's temper was as legendary as his own. As the doors closed, he noticed Elena standing in the corner, holding a cleaning cart. She seemed focused on her work, completely unfazed by his presence. "Good morning," Victor said, his tone neutral. Elena glanced at him, surprised. "Good morning. You don't seem like the type to work here," Victor said, studying her. "What's your story?" Elena hesitated. "I don't think my story would interest you, Mr. Chambers." "Try me," Victor said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Elena met his gaze, her expression calm. "I'm just a janitor, sir. That's all there is to it." Victor smirked. "Somehow, I don't believe that." Before Elena could respond, the elevator dinged, and Victor stepped out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. That evening, Victor found himself thinking about Elena. There was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She wasn't like the people he usually surrounded himself with, and that both fascinated and irritated him. When he returned to his penthouse, Catherine was waiting for him, her arms crossed. "Victor, we need to talk." "About what?" Victor asked, loosening his tie. "About your future," Catherine said. "You're running out of time to find a suitable wife. Do you want the family legacy to end with you?" Victor groaned. "Not this again." "I'm serious," Catherine said. "You need to think about your reputation. The Chambers name means something." Victor rolled his eyes. "And you think I should marry someone like Lila Duval to preserve that reputation?" Catherine smiled. "Exactly." Victor sighed, his frustration boiling over. "Fine. I'll get married. But don't expect it to be someone from your approved list." The next day, Victor made a decision that shocked everyone. During a company event, he approached Elena in front of the entire staff and said, "Elena Rivera, will you marry me?" The room fell silent. Elena stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" "You heard me," Victor said, smirking. "Marry me." Elena hesitated, her mind racing. She had no idea what Victor was up to, but she sensed there was more to this proposal than met the eye. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady. Victor's smirk faltered for a moment. "Let's just say it's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Elena crossed her arms. "I'm not interested in being part of some game, Mr. Chambers." "It's not a game," Victor said. "Think about it. You'll never have to work another day in your life. You'll have everything you've ever wanted." Elena's jaw tightened. "And what about what you want?" Victor met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That's my business." After a long pause, Elena sighed. "Fine. I'll marry you." The crowd erupted into whispers as Victor took Elena's hand and led her out of the room. Catherine, who had been watching from the sidelines, looked as though she might faint. "What have you done, Victor?" she hissed. "Exactly what you wanted, Mother," Victor said with a smirk. "I'm getting married." The aftermath of Victor's proposal left everyone in shock. The office buzzed with rumors, and Catherine was livid. She stormed into Victor's office the next day, slamming the door behind her. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she demanded. "A janitor? You proposed to a janitor, Victor." Victor leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed by his mother's fury. "I thought you wanted me to get married, Mother. You didn't specify who." "This is not a joke," Catherine snapped. "Do you know what people are saying? How this will affect our family's reputation?" Victor smirked. "Let them talk. It doesn't bother me." Catherine narrowed her eyes. "It should. The Chambers name is synonymous with prestige and power, and you've reduced it to a tabloid headline." Victor stood, his expression cold. "What I do with my life is my business. If you don't like it, that's your problem." Before Catherine could respond, Victor walked past her, leaving her fuming in his office. Meanwhile, Elena was grappling with her own doubts. After the whirlwind proposal, she had barely had time to process what had happened. Victor's intentions were unclear, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used. But she also knew that this marriage could change her life, and not just financially. Her best friend, Ryan, was less optimistic. "This is insane, Elena," he said as they sat in her modest apartment. "You can't marry a man like Victor Chambers. He's arrogant, controlling, and—" "I know," Elena interrupted. "But I'm not doing this for him. I have my reasons." Ryan frowned. "Are you going to tell him the truth?" Elena shook her head. "Not yet. He doesn't deserve to know. Not until he shows me who he really is." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just promise me you'll be careful. That man isn't used to being told no." Elena smiled faintly. "Don't worry about me. I've handled worse." The wedding was a small, private affair held at Victor's sprawling estate. Catherine had insisted on keeping it low-key, hoping to minimize the scandal. Despite her protests, Victor had refused to involve any high society figures, opting instead for a simple ceremony. As Elena walked down the aisle, wearing a modest yet elegant dress, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The man waiting for her at the altar was a stranger in many ways, yet she couldn't deny the spark of curiosity that had begun to grow between them. Victor watched her approach with an unreadable expression. He was used to making calculated decisions, but this, marrying someone so far outside his world, was uncharted territory. Part of him wondered why he had done it, but another part was intrigued by the challenge. When the ceremony ended and the vows were exchanged, Victor leaned in close and whispered, "You're full of surprises, Elena." She smiled faintly. "So are you." The early days of their marriage were awkward, to say the least. Victor, used to his cold, solitary lifestyle, found himself sharing his home with a woman who seemed determined to remain independent. Elena refused to rely on his wealth, continuing to cook her own meals and maintain her routines. One evening, Victor found her reading in the library, her hair tied back and her feet tucked beneath her on the couch. He paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Comfortable?" he asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Elena glanced up, unfazed. "More comfortable than I expected." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Most people would jump at the chance to live like this. You act like it's nothing." She set her book down, meeting his gaze. "Because it is. Money doesn't impress me, Victor. People do." Her words caught him off guard, and he didn't have a response. Instead, he turned and walked away, her voice lingering in his mind. As the weeks passed, Victor began to notice things about Elena that didn't add up. She spoke several languages fluently, effortlessly switching between them when dealing with the staff. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of art and history, correcting him on several occasions when he made offhand comments. One evening, they attended a charity gala together. Victor had insisted on her presence, wanting to test how she handled high society. To his surprise, Elena navigated the event with grace, charming everyone she spoke to. Even Catherine, who had begrudgingly attended, couldn't hide her astonishment. "Where did you learn to do that?" Victor asked as they drove home. Elena smiled mysteriously. "Let's just say I've had an interesting life." Victor frowned. "You're hiding something." She tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "Maybe. But so are you." Victor didn't press further, but the encounter left him curious. He began to dig into Elena's past, using his connections to uncover more about the woman he had married. What he found shocked him. Elena Rivera wasn't just a janitor. She had once been a renowned scientist, working on groundbreaking medical research that had saved countless lives. Her work had earned her accolades and recognition, but she had disappeared from the public eye years ago, leaving her career behind. Victor stared at the report in disbelief. How could someone with such an illustrious background end up cleaning floors in his building? What had happened to make her leave everything behind? That evening, Victor confronted Elena in his office. He placed the report on the desk, his expression unreadable. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice low. Elena glanced at the papers, her face calm. "I see you've been busy. Why didn't you tell me?" Victor demanded. "You're a world-class scientist, for God's sake. Why are you working as a janitor?" Elena sighed, sitting down across from him. "Because I needed a fresh start. My work was my life for years, but it came at a cost. I lost people I cared about and I couldn't take it anymore." Victor frowned. "So you gave it all up? Just like that?" "It wasn't just like that," Elena said, her voice firm. "I made a choice, to live a simpler life, away from the pressure and expectations. It may not make sense to you, but it was the right decision for me." Victor studied her, his mind racing. He had always believed that success was everything, that status and wealth were the ultimate goals. But Elena had walked away from it all, choosing peace over power. It was a concept he struggled to understand. "You're an enigma, Elena," he said finally, "and I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing." She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's both." As their marriage progressed, Victor found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. Elena's strength and resilience challenged him to confront his own flaws, forcing him to reevaluate what truly mattered. For the first time in years, he began to see the people around him as more than just tools in his empire. Even Catherine, who had been fiercely opposed to the marriage, began to soften. She watched as her son and daughter-in-law navigated their unconventional relationship, slowly realizing that Elena's presence was making Victor a better man. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Catherine raised her glass. "To Elena, she said, surprising everyone. For reminding us that strength comes in many forms. Elena smiled, touched by the gesture. Thank you, Catherine. Victor glanced at his mother, his expression one of quiet gratitude. For the first time in years, their family felt whole. Victor Chambers couldn't deny it any longer. Elena was different. She wasn't just a woman with a mysterious past. She was someone who had reshaped his world entirely. For a man who had lived his life by the rules of profit and power, this was an unsettling revelation. But it was also freeing. Over the weeks that followed, Victor and Elena began to find a rhythm in their relationship. While it was far from a conventional marriage, there were moments of genuine connection that surprised them both. Victor, who had always been guarded and calculating, started to let his walls down, little by little. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, Victor came home to find Elena in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a simple apron over her clothes, but the sight of her humming softly as she cooked stopped him in his tracks. Didn't know you cooked, Victor said, leaning against the doorframe. Elena glanced over her shoulder, a playful smile on her lips. There's a lot you don't know about me. Victor chuckled, stepping closer. I'm starting to realize that. As they sat down to eat, Victor couldn't help but notice how peaceful the moment felt. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about board meetings, acquisitions, or profit margins. He was simply present. This is good, Victor said, gesturing to his plate. Really good? Elena smirked. Don't sound so surprised. Victor smiled, and for a moment, they sat in companionable silence. But there was a question lingering in his mind, one he hadn't dared to ask before. Why did you really leave your old life behind? He asked, his voice quiet. Elena hesitated, her gaze dropping to her plate. I told you. I needed a fresh start. That's part of it, Victor said. But it's not the whole story, is it? Elena sighed, setting down her fork. No, it's not. She took a deep breath before continuing. A few years ago, I was working on a groundbreaking project, something that could have saved millions of lives. But there was an accident, and someone close to me didn't make it. I blamed myself. No matter how much everyone told me it wasn't my fault, I couldn't shake the guilt. So I walked away. Victor stared at her, his heart sinking. He had expected a complicated answer, but this was more than he had anticipated. I'm sorry, he said, his voice sincere. Elena met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. It's in the past. I've made peace with it. Victor nodded, but her story stayed with him long after they finished dinner. The next day, Victor found himself distracted at work. His usual focus was nowhere to be found, replaced by thoughts of Elena and the life she had left behind. He couldn't help but wonder what it must have been like for her, to carry the weight of such a loss and still find the strength to start over. Mr. Chambers? Grace, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. Your meeting is in 5 minutes. Victor blinked, snapping back to reality. Thank you, Grace. As he gathered his things, he made a decision. It was time to stop living on autopilot. If Elena could face her past and move forward, so could he. That evening, Victor came home with an unexpected proposition. Elena, he said as they sat in the living room, how would you feel about going back to your work? Elena frowned. What do you mean? I mean the work you were doing before, Victor clarified. The research, the projects. You were making a difference? Elena shook her head. That part of my life is over, Victor. It doesn't have to be, he said. You're brilliant, Elena. The world could use someone like you. Elena hesitated, her expression conflicted. It's not that simple. Maybe not, Victor admitted. But if anyone can figure it out, it's you. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to consider the possibility. Could she go back? Could she pick up the pieces of her old life and make a difference again? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'll think about it, she said finally. Victor nodded. That's all I ask. As weeks turned into months, Elena began to explore her options. With Victor's support, she reconnected with former colleagues and began reviewing the research she had abandoned. It wasn't easy, returning to a world she had left behind, but she was determined to see if she could still make an impact. Victor, for his part, continued to change in ways that surprised even himself. He started prioritizing his employees' well-being, implementing new policies that focused on work-life balance and mental health. For the first time, he began to see his company as more than just a machine for making money. Catherine, however, remained skeptical. One evening, as she and Victor sat in his office, she voiced her concerns. "I have to admit," Catherine said, swirling her glass of wine, "I didn't think your marriage would last this long." Victor smirked. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Mother." "I'm serious," Catherine said. "Elena is different. I'll give her that. But do you really think she's the right fit for our family?" Victor set down his glass, his expression firm. "She's exactly what this family needs. And what I need." Catherine studied him for a moment before sighing. "Well, I can't say I understand it, but I suppose it's not my place to interfere." "Glad we agree on that," Victor said with a faint smile. One evening, Elena received an email that changed everything. It was from a global nonprofit organization that focused on providing medical care to underserved communities. They had heard about her past work and were eager to collaborate with her on a new project. As she read the email, her heart raced. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to make a difference again. But it also meant stepping back into a world she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Victor noticed her excitement and leaned over to read the email. "This is incredible," he said. "You have to do it?" Elena hesitated. "What if I fail?" Victor placed a hand on hers, his expression sincere. "You won't. And even if you do, it's better to try than to wonder what could have been." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Victor. For believing in me." "Always," he said. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Elena threw herself into her work, collaborating with the nonprofit to develop life-saving treatments for communities in need. Her passion and expertise shone through, earning her the respect and admiration of everyone she worked with. Victor, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. Inspired by Elena, he began using his wealth and influence to support causes he cared about, from education to environmental sustainability. The man who had once been defined by his cold ambition was now a force for good, driven by a desire to leave the world better than he found it. On their one-year anniversary, Victor surprised Elena with a small gathering at their home. It wasn't a lavish affair, just close friends and family celebrating the journey they had shared. As they stood together, Victor raised a glass. "To Elena," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for teaching me that success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the impact we have on the people around us." Elena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And to Victor," she said, "for proving that even the coldest hearts can learn to love." The room erupted into applause, and as they clinked their glasses, Victor and Elena shared a quiet moment of understanding. They had both come a long way, and while their journey was far from over, they knew they were stronger together. Elena's work with the global nonprofit transformed her life in ways she hadn't imagined. She traveled to remote villages, collaborating with teams to develop medical treatments and distribute resources. Each day was a reminder of why she had fallen in love with science in the first place. But as fulfilling as the work was, it wasn't easy. The pressure to succeed was immense, and the long hours took a toll on her. Victor, ever the supportive husband, found ways to help. He used his wealth and influence to provide funding for Elena's projects, ensuring they had access to state-of-the-art equipment and facilities. More than that, he became her sounding board, listening patiently as she talked about her challenges and victories. One evening, Elena returned home from a particularly exhausting trip. She dropped her bag by the door and sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples. Victor appeared moments later, holding a steaming cup of tea. "Rough day?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Rough week," Elena corrected, taking the tea with a grateful smile. "We're so close to a breakthrough, but every time we think we've solved one problem, another one pops up." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing incredible work, Elena. Don't lose sight of that." Elena sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. If I'm really making a difference." Victor placed a hand on hers, his voice firm. "You are. I see it every day. And so do the people whose lives you're changing." His words brought tears to her eyes, and she leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. In moments like these, she realized just how much Victor had changed. The man who had once been cold and distant was now her greatest source of strength. Meanwhile, Victor's own transformation continued to ripple through his company. Under his leadership, Chambers Enterprises had shifted its focus, prioritizing sustainability and social responsibility. Employees who had once feared him now admired him, inspired by his commitment to making a positive impact. Catherine, too, had softened. While she still struggled to understand Elena's choices, she couldn't deny the positive influence her daughter-in-law had on Victor. One afternoon, as the three of them sat in the garden, Catherine turned to Elena. "I'll admit, I had my doubts about you," Catherine said, her tone surprisingly gentle. "But you've proven me wrong. You've made Victor better." Elena smiled. "Thank you, Catherine. That means a lot." Catherine hesitated, then added, "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're part of this family." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Careful, mother. That almost sounded like a compliment." Catherine swatted his arm playfully, and for the first time in years, their laughter filled the garden. As their marriage approached its second year, Victor and Elena decided to host a fundraiser for the nonprofit she worked with. The event, held at their estate, was a grand affair, with influential figures from all walks of life in attendance. Elena, ever humble, focused on the cause rather than the glitz and glamour, but Victor couldn't help but admire how effortlessly she commanded the room. During the event, Victor found himself in conversation with a group of businessmen. One of them, a smug executive named Gregory, leaned in close. "Quite the charity act you've got going here, Chambers," Gregory said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Marrying a janitor and turning her into a star. Must have taken a lot of work." Victor's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Actually, Gregory, I didn't turn her into anything. Elena was already extraordinary. I'm just lucky enough to be her husband." Gregory chuckled, clearly uncomfortable, and quickly changed the subject. As he walked away, Victor felt a surge of pride. For the first time in his life, he realized that success wasn't about power or status. It was about the people who stood beside you. As the evening wore on, Elena took the stage to deliver a speech. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, she spoke with passion and conviction, sharing stories of the lives that had been changed by the nonprofit's work. The audience hung on her every word, captivated by her authenticity. "We often think that changing the world is an impossible task," Elena said, her voice steady. "But the truth is, it starts with small steps. One person, one act of kindness, one moment of courage. Together, we can create a ripple effect that transforms lives." The room erupted into applause as Elena stepped down from the stage. Victor met her at the bottom of the stairs, his expression filled with admiration. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her into a hug. Elena smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." The fundraiser was a resounding success, raising millions of dollars for the nonprofit. But more than that, it cemented Elena's place as a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer just Victor Chambers' wife. She was a leader, a visionary, and an inspiration. In the weeks that followed, Elena received countless invitations to speak at events and collaborate on new projects. While she was grateful for the opportunities, she also felt a growing need to focus on the people who mattered most. One evening, as she and Victor sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she turned to him. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what's next." Victor raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I love my work," Elena said, "but I don't want it to consume me. I want to find a balance, something that lets me make a difference while still having time for us." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Elena smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for everything." Victor placed a kiss on her forehead, his heart swelling with love. "You don't have to thank me. You've given me more than I ever thought possible." The following year brought new challenges and triumphs. Elena continued her work with the nonprofit, focusing on mentorship and education. She launched a scholarship program for underprivileged students, ensuring that future generations had access to the opportunities she had once fought for. Victor, too, expanded his efforts, creating a foundation dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs from marginalized communities. Together, they became a powerhouse duo, using their resources and influence to create lasting change. But their greatest accomplishment wasn't their work, it was the life they built together. Through the highs and lows, they learned to lean on each other, to celebrate their victories and navigate their struggles as a team. On their 3rd anniversary, Victor surprised Elena with a private dinner in the garden. As they sat beneath the stars, surrounded by candlelight, he reached across the table to take her hand. "I never thought I'd say this," Victor said, his voice filled with emotion. "But marrying you was the best decision I've ever made." Elena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And saying yes was mine." As they clinked their glasses, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the love and gratitude that had brought them together. Victor and Elena had come a long way, but their story was far from over. While their marriage had transformed their lives in countless ways, new challenges awaited them, ones that would test their bond and reveal the true depth of their commitment to each other. One crisp autumn morning, Elena received an unexpected email. It was from an international think tank, inviting her to join a panel of leading scientists working on global health initiatives. The project was ambitious, spanning multiple countries and requiring months of travel. While the opportunity was thrilling, it also came with sacrifices. Elena stared at her screen, her emotions swirling. She knew this was the kind of work she had always dreamed of doing, but it would mean spending extended periods away from Victor and the life they had built together. That evening, she brought it up over dinner. "Victor, I got an email today. It's a big opportunity." Victor looked up from his plate, curiosity lighting his eyes. "What kind of opportunity?" Elena explained the details, her voice tinged with excitement and hesitation. "It's a chance to work with some of the brightest minds in the world. But it would mean traveling a lot, maybe even living abroad for a while." Victor's expression was thoughtful. "And how do you feel about it?" "I want to do it," Elena admitted. "But I don't want to leave you." Victor reached across the table, taking her hand. "Elena, you've always been passionate about making a difference. If this is what you want, I'll support you. We'll figure out the rest." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "You mean that?" "Of course," Victor said, his voice steady. "Your dreams are just as important as mine." The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Elena dove headfirst into the project, collaborating with scientists and policymakers from around the world. She traveled to remote villages, bustling cities, and everything in between, bringing her expertise to bear on some of the most pressing health crises of the time. Victor, meanwhile, found ways to stay connected despite the distance. They spoke every night, their conversations ranging from lighthearted banter to deep discussions about their hopes and fears. For a man who had once prided himself on his independence, Victor found himself cherishing these moments of vulnerability. But the separation wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when the weight of their commitments felt almost unbearable. Yet, through it all, they reminded themselves of why they were doing this: for each other, for the world, and for the future they believed in. One day, during a rare visit home, Elena surprised Victor with news of her own. "I've been thinking about the future," she said as they sat in the garden. "About what comes next." Victor raised an eyebrow. "You've got my attention." Elena smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I want to create something lasting, something that combines both of our passions. A foundation that focuses on health, education, and entrepreneurship. A place where people can come together to create real change." Victor leaned back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. "I like the sound of that. What do you have in mind?" "We could start small," Elena said. "Maybe a center here in Riverside, where people can access resources and mentorship. And if it works, we could expand." Victor nodded, already envisioning the possibilities. "Let's do it." Over the next year, the foundation became their shared passion project. They named it the Chambers Rivera Foundation, a symbol of their partnership and the values they stood for. The foundation's flagship center opened in Riverside, offering everything from medical clinics to business workshops to scholarships for underprivileged students. The grand opening was a moment of pride for both Victor and Elena. Standing together on the stage, they addressed the crowd that had gathered to celebrate the occasion. "This foundation represents more than just a building," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. It's proof that no matter where you come from, you have the power to make a difference." Victor stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. "For years, I thought success was about power and wealth. But Elena taught me that true success is about impact, about using what you have to lift others up. This foundation is our way of giving back, and we're just getting started." The audience erupted into applause, and as Victor and Elena embraced, they knew they had created something that would outlast them both. As the foundation grew, so did their legacy. They expanded their reach, opening centers in cities around the world and partnering with organizations to tackle issues like poverty, disease, and inequality. Their work brought them closer together, strengthening the bond that had begun as an unlikely partnership. But their journey wasn't without challenges. Balancing their personal and professional lives required constant effort, and there were moments when the pressure threatened to overwhelm them. Yet, through it all, they leaned on each other, finding strength in their shared purpose. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their home, watching the sun set over the city, Victor turned to Elena. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice soft. Elena smiled, her hand resting on his. "All the time. It feels like a lifetime ago." Victor chuckled. "I never thought I'd be here, working on a foundation, talking about impact and change. And I definitely never thought I'd be married to someone like you." Elena tilted her head, a playful glint in her eyes. "Someone like me? You know what I mean," Victor said, laughing. "You've changed everything, Elena. And I'm grateful for it." Elena leaned in, her voice full of warmth. "You've changed too, Victor. And I'm grateful for you." The years passed, and their impact continued to grow. The Chambers Rivera Foundation became a global force for good, touching the lives of millions. Yet, for Victor and Elena, their greatest accomplishment wasn't the accolades or the recognition, it was the life they had built together. On their 5th anniversary, Victor surprised Elena with a quiet celebration at the original Foundation Center in Riverside. As they walked through the halls, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Elena felt a profound sense of fulfillment. "This is all because of you," Victor said, his voice filled with emotion. "You inspired me to be better, to do better." Elena shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's because of us, Victor. We did this together." As they stood in the heart of the center, surrounded by the legacy they had created, they knew that their journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, still lives to change, and still dreams to pursue. But as long as they had each other, they were ready for whatever came next. Together, they had proven that even the most unlikely partnerships could create something extraordinary. And in doing so, they had found a love that was truly worth fighting for. The Chambers Rivera Foundation had grown into a global institution, celebrated for its work in bridging gaps in healthcare, education, and entrepreneurship. Its reach extended to parts of the world often forgotten by larger organizations, and its programs gave hope to countless individuals. For Elena and Victor, the foundation became a living testament to what they could achieve together. But with such success came greater challenges. One day, during a routine board meeting at the foundation, Elena and Victor were confronted with news that shook them to their core. The foundation's newest project, an initiative to bring clean water to underserved villages in Southeast Asia, had hit a major roadblock. The project's partners on the ground were facing resistance from local governments, and funding delays threatened to derail months of work. Elena leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What are our options?" she asked the project manager, a young woman named Priya. "We could pause the project until we resolve the government's concerns," Priya said hesitantly. "But that would leave thousands of people without access to clean water for months, possibly longer." Victor shook his head, his jaw tight. "Pausing isn't an option. People are counting on us." Elena placed a hand on his arm, her voice calm but firm. "We need to find a solution that works for everyone, Victor. Rushing this won't help. The room fell silent as everyone looked to them for guidance. It was moments like these that tested their leadership and their partnership. After a long pause, Elena spoke. "Let's reach out to local leaders and listen to their concerns," she said. "If we can find common ground, we might be able to move forward without pausing the project. Priya, can you organize a meeting with the key stakeholders?" Priya nodded. "Of course. I'll make it happen." Victor glanced at Elena, his frustration easing. She had a way of diffusing tension and focusing on solutions, a skill he admired more with each passing day. A week later, Elena and Victor traveled to Southeast Asia to meet with the local leaders. It wasn't the first time they had stepped into unfamiliar territory, but the stakes felt higher than ever. The villages they visited were in desperate need of clean water, and the people's stories weighed heavily on their hearts. During one meeting, a village elder named Mr. Tang expressed his concerns. "We've seen projects like this before," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "They start with big promises but leave us worse off when they fail." Elena nodded, her expression empathetic. "I understand your hesitation, Mr. Tang. But this isn't just a project to us, it's a commitment. We want to work with you, not just for you." Victor, who had been listening quietly, added, "If there's anything we can do to earn your trust, tell us. We're here to make this work." The elders studied them for a moment before nodding slowly. "Actions speak louder than words. If you're willing to meet us halfway, we'll see." It was a small step, but it was enough to reignite their hope. Over the following months, Elena and Victor poured their energy into rebuilding trust with the local communities. They worked alongside villagers, participating in everything from planning sessions to physical labor. For Victor, who had spent most of his life in boardrooms, the experience was transformative. One afternoon, as he helped dig a trench for a new water pipeline, he paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. A young boy approached him, holding out a cup of water. "Thank you," Victor said, taking the cup with a smile. The boy grinned. "My name isn't. What's yours?" "Victor," he replied, shaking the boy's hand. "It's nice to meet you." The boy tilted his head. "Are you really a billionaire?" Victor chuckled. "That's what they say." "Why are you doing this?" and asked, his eyes curious. "You don't have to." Victor's smile softened. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because people like you deserve clean water just as much as anyone else." And nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Mr. Victor." As the boy ran off, Victor felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. This work, it wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about building connections and creating a better future. The Clean Water Project eventually succeeded, bringing life-changing resources to thousands of people. It was a milestone for the foundation and a personal triumph for Victor and Elena. Their teamwork had been tested, and they had emerged stronger than ever. But as they returned home, another challenge awaited them, one they hadn't anticipated. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Victor received a phone call from Catherine. Her voice was strained, her usual confidence replaced by worry. "Victor, I need your help," she said. "It's your cousin Henry. He's gotten himself into trouble." Victor frowned. "What kind of trouble?" "Financial trouble," Catherine admitted. "He made some bad investments, and now he's on the verge of losing everything. He's too proud to ask, but he needs help." Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll talk to him." After hanging up, Victor turned to Elena. "Looks like we've got a family emergency." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to help him?" "I don't know," Victor admitted. "Henry and I were never close. But I can't ignore it." Elena placed a hand on his. "Then don't. If you can help, do it. But make sure it's on your terms." Victor nodded, grateful for her wisdom. "You always know what to say." Elena smiled. "That's what I'm here for." The next day, Victor met with Henry to discuss the situation. It was clear that his cousin had made reckless decisions, driven by greed and desperation. But as Victor listened to Henry's story, he couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. He knew what it was like to prioritize wealth over everything else, and he knew how empty it could feel. "I'll help you," Victor said finally. "But there are conditions." Henry looked up, surprised. "Anything. Just tell me." First, you'll need to go through financial counseling, Victor said. And second, you'll use this as an opportunity to rebuild, not just your business, but your character. Henry nodded, his gratitude evident. Thank you, Victor. I won't forget this. Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Don't thank me yet. The real work starts now. In the months that followed, Victor's relationship with Henry grew stronger. Helping his cousin reminded him of how far he had come and how much he still had to learn. With Elena by his side, he found himself embracing challenges with a newfound sense of purpose. For Elena, watching Victor transform was a source of pride and joy. She had always seen the potential in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. Together, they had built a life that was rich in meaning, filled with love, and dedicated to making the world a better place. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Victor surprised Elena with a quiet getaway to a small coastal town. As they walked along the beach, hand in hand, they reflected on everything they had accomplished. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if we hadn't met? Elena asked, her voice soft. Victor smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. All the time. And every time, I'm grateful that we did. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. Me too. As the waves lapped at their feet, they stood together, ready to face whatever the future held. For Victor and Elena, their journey was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that even the most unlikely partnerships could change the world.